My term project is on global warming, and I chose the topic because of an experience that I had last semester while I was student teaching. It mostly is focusing on how to talk about this subject in a high school English class. I get really rambly when I talk about what we did last semester, but basically I would give them articles of the week. And there's more information in the slideshow, but I'm going to skip it for the oral presentation. But one week I gave them the Major Climate Report for 2040, and it generated a lot of response, but these 4 comments are the ones that I'm going to be addressing. So climate change is a hoax, 2 degrees doesn't seem like a lot, too bad so sad for California, and what can we do? These are things that my high school English kids were saying. First, I think it's important to address that there's a difference between global warming and climate change. So global warming applies to the long-term trend of rising average global temperatures, while climate change is a broader term that reflects the fact that carbon pollution does more than just warm our planet. Carbon pollution is also changing rain and snow patterns and increasing the risk of intense storms and droughts. And then I have the source, which, again, I kind of talk about what I did in the classroom later in the presentation, but that's on another slide that I'll be skipping. I would definitely have my students watch the Neil deGrasse Tyson clip, but I won't play that now since everyone's seen it. But I do think that it does a really good job of sort of exposing the current predicament that we're in. Science exists to uncover truths, and just because we're critical thinkers doesn't mean that we get to ignore the evidence. And so here's that quote that says that you don't have the option to not believe the facts. And this is the explanatory slide that I'm going to kind of skip for now. But the best way to start debunking the hoax, I think, is by addressing science directly. So I think it's best to start with what's happening, talking about the greenhouse effect. And I found this image that I really like that shows what the greenhouse effect looks like. So the sun's energy is released, heating the Earth's surface, and this is what drives the Earth's weather and climate, which is really important. And then the Earth radiates energy back into space. But then over on the human-induced side is what we call the greenhouse gases. And these are the ones that trap that outgoing energy and retain heat. But what happens is that more heat gets trapped than needed, and the result is that the Earth might become less habitable for humans, plants, and animals. And it's easy to think about when relating it to salt. So a small amount of salt is essential for human life. More makes it tastier, makes our food tastier, and too much is harmful for our health. So all of this actually is a natural process that occurs and cannot be argued. But what people like to argue, however, is that because it's naturally occurring, it'll naturally work itself out, or we as humans are not at fault. And so as you can see from this graph, carbon dioxide levels have increased and fallen forever, but what this graph proves is that it's now increasing at a faster rate than it ever has before, and it's higher than it ever has been before. And it specifically talks about 1950 and marks that date because it's talking about the Industrial Revolution to prove further, well, I guess the Industrial Revolution started a little earlier, but this all proves that it is being impacted by humans. Like this, we are the cause of this. So that data proves it, and then also the statement from NASA proves it, that I'm not going to talk about, but it specifically, well, it says what we're doing specifically to impact global climate change. But something to keep in mind here is that I'll be stressing this in English class, and I can't really fully teach them a full unit on global warming, so I do want to emphasize that it is complicated, and that's okay. It requires an understanding of how the world works, and just because you can't understand why a warmer Earth might result in more snow in the winter, which I will talk about, the experts do get it, and I find that a lot of teens like conspiracy theories that have no leg to stand on just because they like to argue, and I'm going to talk about this at the end, but there are plenty of things to argue about regarding climate change, but the fact that it exists is not one of them. So then there's this great image that we could even study in class for rhetorical appeal that says 97% of experts say this bridge is going to collapse, 3% say not to worry, would you keep driving, and relating it to climate scientists and climate change. The second part of this is the students who say 2 degrees doesn't seem like a lot, and these students aren't the ones arguing for argument's sake, they just really want to know why this is a big deal. So I have the list from an introduction of climate change that I'm not really going to get into right now, but I do want to come back to the fact that this subject is complicated if you don't have a lot of prior knowledge on how climate works. So just looking at the chart for the greenhouse effect that we saw a few slides ago, you might not see how superstorms or weather events are increasing because of global warming, or the greenhouse effect, but you will by understanding the hydrologic cycle. So when water reaches temperatures like 80 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, more of it evaporates, priming hurricane or cyclone formation. Once born, a hurricane needs only warm water to build and maintain its strength and intensity. So that, and understanding that within the hydrologic cycle, is how global warming impacts weather events. Another thing is, as emissions of greenhouse gases continues to trap more and more of the sun's energies, that energy has to be dissipated, resulting in stronger storms, more intense precipitation, and higher winds, resulting in superstorms. And then by understanding this cycle as well, you can understand why more snow and colder winters are a result of global warming, not a way to debunk it, which is a really big misconception. And then there are kids who understand all of this, but then they look at this list and they think, how is this going to impact me in my life? And this is a very common response that you get when talking about rising sea levels to high schoolers in Cincinnati. And this comment is very concerning, but it definitely elicits a lesson on empathy, but it's not wrong to address the fact that people care about themselves first, or maybe even most. So I took it upon myself to look up the U.S. regional effects of climate change to give some direct information on how this might affect them, and then specifically look at the Midwest. And I'm running out of time, so I won't read this, but it's important to remind kids that climate change will actually affect them wherever they choose to live, and they can't avoid it. And there's also a great article I found talking about inland states are most likely to ignore climate hazards, which again, I'm not going to read all of this, but it points out that the phrases climate change and global warming are politically toxic, and they affect what our state officials do, which I'll talk about at the end. But this last comment I'll address is the question, what can we do about it? And the first type of student who would say this is kind of nihilistic, where they are saying we're all going to die anyway, so what can we even do? And because of this, I put WWF's response to the right. Again, I'm not going to read all of it, but they do say that the technology and systems that we need to move to 100% renewable energy by 2050 and use our planet's resources sustainably are already available. So another thing that I found when talking about the subject with teenagers is that optimism helps with engagement and definitely with problem solving. But I'm ending on these last two slides because talking about what we can do about it, this is where the debates occur. These subjects. Once you understand how the systems operate and what exactly is happening, you can focus on the efforts that should be done. So with science, what solutions could work and which can't, what policies should be put in place, and what should our elected leaders be voting for. Like, for example, should we have pulled out of the Paris Agreement this past summer? That could go with politics. With journalism, how is the general public responding, and what information are we giving to the general public? Is it okay that we give the same amount of time to the 97% of scientists who have come to a consensus, as well as the 3% who disagree? You can even look at history and see the Mayans and how climate change impacted them, and use that information to inform your decision. But this is all just kind of re-emphasizing that global warming doesn't begin and end with science. It's interdisciplinary, and it needs to be discussed in more classrooms. So that's why I'm fully ending this presentation with a statement from the NCTS, which is the National Council of Teachers of Science. So just a few months ago, they voted to pass a statement saying that no scientific controversy exists regarding basic facts of climate change, and that any controversies are based on social, economic, or political arguments and are not science. So basically now teachers can talk about global warming in class without getting in trouble. And it might seem ridiculous that I had to come to this, but at least we're heading in the right direction.